Before we begin, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss future journeys like this one. The air was still in the Judengasse, narrow alleys twisted between rows of timber-framed houses, their windows leaning gently forward, as if whispering to each other across the street. It was Frankfurt in the mid-1700s, and life moved at the pace of candles and footsteps. Within one of those modest homes, on the top floor beneath a slanted wooden roof, a young boy quietly opened an old chest. His name was Mayor Amschel Rothschild. He was no older than 10, and what he found that day would shape not only his life, but the history of modern finance. Inside the chest were coins, some silver, some gold, some so worn that the faces on them had faded into smooth metal. They belonged to his father, Amschel Moses Rothschild, who dealt in small trade, lending, and antique objects. Mayer was drawn to these coins not for their weight, but for their stories. Each came from a different time, a different place: ancient Rome, the Holy Roman Empire, Italian city-states, tiny principalities that no longer existed. He didn't yet understand their values, but he understood their significance. These were artifacts of trust, tiny pieces of history that had once been exchanged in good faith. His fascination grew silently. He asked questions, read what he could, and watched his father work. The family lived with modest means. Their world was defined by limits: physical, legal, social. Jews in Frankfurt at that time were confined to the Judengasse, a closed street they could not leave at night, their occupations tightly controlled. But within that street, knowledge passed from father to son, and Mayer listened carefully. He learned that coins could hold more than metal. They could hold relationships, a trusted mark, a known weight, a shared understanding between people who might never meet again. At the age of 13, Mayer's father passed away. It was a quiet loss, but a life-changing one. Left without guidance, Mayer was sent to Hanover to apprentice at a banking house. There, he polished silverware, delivered messages, and eventually helped count coin. He studied currency values, learned the difference between debased and true metals, and began to see how finance worked, not in vaults, but in words, in handwritten ledgers, in punctual letters, in careful records. The attic in Frankfurt had been his first classroom, but now the world of European money was opening before him. In Hanover, Mayer learned quietly. He observed more than he spoke, and he noticed patterns, how merchants extended credit, how interest was calculated, how trust was built not only through collateral, but through character. Banking in the 18th century was slow and personal. There were no stock markets in the modern sense, no digital systems. It all depended on handwritten agreements, sealed letters, and consistent behavior over time. What stood out to Mayer was the role of reputation. He saw how bankers with the same resources could receive different treatment depending on their history. Punctuality, discretion, and humility were currencies of their own. He began to understand that finance was not just about numbers. It was about rhythm, predictability, quiet strength. By the time he returned to Frankfurt, Mayer was still young, but his experience was deep. He reopened a small business in the Judengasse, continuing in his father's footsteps, dealing in rare coins and currency exchange. But his vision had shifted. Where others saw coins as collectibles, Mayer saw them as a gateway, an opening into larger relationships with powerful clients. One of those clients was Crown Prince Wilhelm of Hesse. Mayer's knowledge of antique coins had impressed Wilhelm's court, and soon
Mayer was entrusted with more than rare objects. He began handling funds, managing accounts, quietly becoming not just a trader, but a trusted advisor. In those early years, Mayer worked behind a modest storefront. No lavish office, no grand signage, just a desk, a safe, and a steady hand. He kept detailed records, copied every transaction by hand, and responded to letters with care. His tone was always polite, his handwriting even. He did not rush. Over time, his reputation grew. He was no longer seen only as a man in the Judengasse. He was seen as someone who could be relied upon. And in the world of finance, that distinction meant everything. What began with a box of old coins had become something more, a philosophy of steadiness, a belief that money, when handled quietly and wisely, could build bridges far beyond one's own street. And Mayer wasn't finished. He had 5 sons. Each would carry a piece of this quiet legacy outward, into Europe, into power, and into the long arc of financial history.
The Judengasse was no more than a single narrow street. Its name meant Jewish alley, and for centuries it was both a home and a boundary. In 18th century Frankfurt, Jews were permitted to live only here. The street was gated at both ends, locked at night, and watched by guards. Within those walls, life unfolded with resilience and routine. The houses were tall and close together. Generations lived under one roof. Families shared space, meals, and stories. There were little privacy, but a great deal of closeness. Every morning, shutters creaked open. Vendors called out their goods. Children played in the mud between wagons and laundry lines. The air carried the smells of baking bread and inked parchment. Mayer Rothschild lived here not just by birth, but by constraint. He had returned from Hanover with new knowledge and a quiet determination. In his modest storefront, he sold rare coins, advised on currency exchange, and slowly built a clientele. But beyond the walls of the ghetto, life operated under different rules. To do business with nobles, Mayer had to navigate prejudice and protocol. Jews could not own property outside the Judengasse. They could not join guilds. They paid special taxes simply for the right to stay. But within these limits, Mayer found a way forward by focusing on what could not be taken: reputation, precision, and trust. His greatest asset was correspondence. He wrote carefully, with practiced language and respectful tone. Every letter was both a proposal and a performance. He knew that clients in court circles valued discretion, so he made that a feature, not a burden. He kept secrets. He offered clarity. He listened more than he spoke. One of the first to notice this was Crown Prince Wilhelm of Hesse-Kassel. A man of wealth and military interest, Wilhelm had need of quiet, competent advisors. Mayer was invited to the court not as a guest, but as a useful voice. Through coins, currency advice, and quiet efficiency, he became a trusted contact. It was not glamour that earned him this role. It was consistency. As Mayer's reputation grew, so did the limits of the Judengasse. Though he still lived within its gates, his letters traveled far beyond them, carried by couriers, sealed with wax, read in halls of power. His world was expanding quietly, thread by thread, and the threads were silver. The silver threads that connected Mayer Rothschild to the outside world were not made of metal. They were made of relationships, delicate, strong, and built slowly. In a time before telegraphs and banks as we know them, communication itself was currency. A well-written letter, delivered on time, could build more trust than a handshake. Mayer began developing a system. He noted every coin, every date, every exchange. He knew what his clients needed before they asked. If a currency was falling in value, he warned them in advance. If a deal required discretion, he kept it sealed. Over time, his reliability became his brand. But Mayer also understood something deeper. He saw that the value of money was not in the metal, but in the promise behind it. Gold could be hoarded, but promises moved. And trust, earned through calm, precise action, could go farther than force. This belief shaped how he raised his sons, Amschel, Salomon, Nathan, Carl, and James. Each of them grew up behind the walls of the Judengasse, watching their father's careful routines. He taught them handwriting before arithmetic. He showed them how to wrap parcels, how to write ledgers, how to speak with respect. He didn't raise bankers, he raised couriers of trust. His plan was quiet but ambitious. Each son would someday leave Frankfurt, not to escape the ghetto, but to expand the network. One to Vienna, one to Naples, one to Paris, one to London, and one to stay. 5 cities, 5 threads, one family. By the end of the century, the first steps had begun. Mayer's eldest, Amschel, remained in Frankfurt to continue the family house. Nathan, sharp and bold, traveled to England. Each carried letters of introduction and detailed instructions, sealed with care. They did not arrive as bankers. They arrived as merchants, translators, coin dealers, safe occupations that allowed them to blend in and build slowly. But underneath, a system was taking shape, a network that crossed borders, a web of couriers, ledgers, and coded notes, all powered by trust. The walls of the Judengasse still stood, but through the actions of one quiet man and his 5 sons, those walls were becoming less important. The Rothschilds were building something new, a bank without a single building, a reputation stronger than law, a network held together by silver threads. As the 19th century began, Europe was changing. Wars stirred, alliances shifted, empires redefined themselves. But amid the noise of politics and armies, something quieter was taking root. A new kind of financial structure, one built not by kings or generals, but by letters. The Rothschilds understood this deeply. Their business did not rely on grand vaults or towering buildings. It relied on communication. In an age before telegraphs, the fastest, most reliable way to send information was through private couriers. And the Rothschild family made this system an art form. Each brother, now established in a different European city, acted as both banker and messenger. Their letters traveled daily, wrapped in wax, encoded, precise. They wrote not in flowing language, but in controlled tones. Interest rates, exchange values, military movements, trade disruptions. The letters read like quiet instruments, measuring the pulse of Europe's economies. These exchanges weren't simply updates, they were decisions. When Nathan in London received news of a currency shortage in Paris, he could act instantly, send in funds, adjusting loans, protecting assets. When James in France saw signs of war, he warned his brothers, allowing them to prepare in other markets. The Rothschild network moved faster than governments, quietly, consistently. At the heart of it all was the ledger. Each morning in the Rothschild offices began in the same quiet way. Ink bottles were opened, ledgers were unwrapped, candles were trimmed. Before any decisions were made, the family read the latest letters. From London to Frankfurt, Paris to Vienna, each brother reported what he saw: markets rising or falling, ships delayed by weather, rumors of conflict, or new opportunities in distant cities. The tone of their writing was steady. No flourishes, no speculation, just observation. These daily exchanges allowed the Rothschilds to respond faster than others. While larger institutions waited for official reports, the brothers already knew. Their advantage wasn't speed alone, it was trust in one another. Because they were family, they shared not just profits, but principles. They had grown up with the same lessons: to be discreet, cautious, and exact. When Nathan acted in London, he did so with the confidence that James in Paris or Salomon in Vienna would support his move. When a loan was extended in Naples, the other brothers adjusted their holdings to balance the risk. No one worked in isolation. Each decision echoed across the network. But trust extended beyond the family. Clients learned that when they dealt with a Rothschild in one city, their needs would be understood in another. A merchant in Paris could borrow funds and repay them in London. A diplomat traveling across Europe could have credit arranged in advance. This flexibility gave the Rothschilds a rare quality: dependability across borders. In an age when borders shifted and currencies collapsed, that dependability became invaluable. And yet, their influence remained quiet. The Rothschilds did not build monuments. They did not place their names on palaces. Their power was in their invisibility. It lived in sealed envelopes, ledger pages, and trusted signatures. Each letter was a promise. Each ledger line, a reflection of character. Each day, a chance to act with calm precision. Through paper, pen, and trust, the Rothschilds were not just recording history, they were shaping it. The Rothschilds were meticulous. Every transaction was recorded by hand. Entries were cross-checked, amounts verified, clients listed with care. Trust, they believed, was not a feeling. It was a pattern. If a client repaid on time, they were noted. If a partner delayed payment, that too was noted. Over time, these books became more than financial records. They were maps of reliability. But even the best systems required something more: judgment. Letters and ledgers could inform, but not decide. Each brother had to interpret, to weigh risks, to act not only on numbers, but on character. They learned to sense which clients could be helped, and which posed danger. They lent carefully. They avoided greed. And because of this, when others failed, the Rothschilds endured. Their offices were modest. Their handwriting was precise. Their tone always calm. But behind these gentle details lay extraordinary coordination. The family had become a living network, a single organism stretched across 5 cities, operating as one. And as wars loomed ever closer, that network would soon be tested. In most families, sons grow up under one roof, learn similar trades, and settle nearby. But Mayer Rothschild had a different vision. He saw his sons not only as heirs, but as extensions of a single enterprise, spread across Europe, but united by trust. By the early 1800s, this vision was taking shape. Each of Mayer's 5 sons had grown into his own strengths. Each had learned the quiet art of finance, and now each would take that knowledge beyond the borders of Frankfurt. Amschel, the eldest, remained at the family home. Frankfurt would be the anchor, the original house, the keeper of records, the center of correspondence. He was steady, disciplined, and loyal to his father's memory. In the Judengasse, Amschel maintained the rhythm Mayer had set in motion. Salomon was sent to Vienna, the capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. There, in halls filled with bureaucracy and tradition, he introduced the Rothschild name with caution and tact. He knew that progress came slowly in imperial cities, but he also knew how to wait. Karl established the Naples branch. Southern Italy offered opportunity and unpredictability. Karl built relationships carefully, working with local merchants and royal officials. He understood the value of adaptability. James, the youngest, was sent to Paris. France was changing rapidly, with revolutions behind and uncertainty ahead. But James moved with quiet boldness. He learned the culture, mastered the language, and brought structure to the city's financial life. He would become a central figure in French banking, yet never sought the spotlight. And then there was Nathan. He went to London. England was rising as a financial powerhouse, and Nathan, sharp and energetic, saw the city's potential. He arrived as a trader, modest in appearance, but with a strategy already forming. Within a few years, Nathan Rothschild would become one of the most influential bankers in British history. What connected these five brothers was not distance, but discipline. Each wrote daily, each accounted for every transaction, each followed the same quiet code: act with precision, speak with care, move with purpose. They shared no grand building, no single flag, but they shared values, and those values, passed from a quiet father in Frankfurt, would allow them to shape the financial future of Europe, calmly, steadily, and together. The Rothschild brothers understood that their strength was not just in what they owned, but in how they were connected. Unlike other bankers who operated from a single city or relied on slow diplomatic channels, the Rothschilds created something different: a living, breathing financial network. Their letters moved across borders every day. Written in careful script, each contained updates, exchange rates, political observations, and lending conditions. Couriers carried these messages on horseback and by carriage, often faster than official state communications. In times of war or peace, the Rothschilds often knew first and acted first. But this system was more than fast. It was balanced. If one market faced disruption, say, a debt crisis in Naples, Karl could inform the others. James in Paris might slow lending. Nathan in London might shift capital. Salomon in Vienna could reinforce regional trust. Amschel would record it all, coordinating from Frankfurt. Like 5 fingers of one hand, the brothers moved independently, yet always in concert. Their decisions were cautious. They preferred steady returns over dramatic gains. They avoided speculative risks. Instead, they focused on long-term relationships with governments, noble houses, and industrial partners. Each brother adapted to his city, but never abandoned the family principles: discretion, diligence, and quiet strength. This unity extended beyond business. The Rothschilds arranged marriages within the family to preserve alignment. Cousins married cousins, not from arrogance, but from a desire to maintain shared understanding. It was not unusual to find a letter discussing bond yields and wedding plans in the same breath. They did not build cathedrals or monuments, they built consistency. Their offices were not marked by grandeur, but by silence. Clean desks, ordered books, timely letters. By the 1820s, the Rothschild name meant something different in each city. In London, it was linked to government finance. In Paris, to infrastructure. In Naples, to sovereign loans. But everywhere, it meant reliability. It meant that a promise made would be a promise kept. 5 brothers, 5 cities, one unbroken line of trust. In the early 19th century, Europe stood on the edge of war, again. The continent had seen conflict before, but the Napoleonic Wars brought a new scale of disruption. Empires clashed, borders shifted, armies marched through cities and countrysides alike. For most, war brought only fear and instability. But for the Rothschilds, it brought something else: responsibility. War required money. More than weapons or soldiers, it demanded constant flows of capital to feed troops, build ships, buy horses, supply nations, and traditional systems were too slow. Gold moved in carts, letters took days. Banks hesitated, uncertain who might win or lose. But the Rothschild network, already spread across 5 cities, offered something rare: speed, trust, and coordination. Nathan Rothschild, now firmly established in London, became central to this effort. England needed funds to support its war effort across Europe, and Nathan became a key conduit. Working with his brothers, he helped move money quietly between governments, across enemy lines, and into the hands of allies. The process was delicate. Gold could not simply be shipped openly across borders. It had to move in stages through trusted couriers, disguised as trade. Letters had to be coded, deliveries staggered. Every step involved risk, not just of loss, but of exposure. If a shipment failed or a courier was caught, the consequences could reach far. Yet Nathan managed it with calm focus. He negotiated exchange rates, organized deliveries, and kept records so precise that funds could be traced through half a dozen cities. While others guessed, the Rothschilds calculated. One of their greatest successes came in 1815, at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. After the Battle of Waterloo, Europe was in financial chaos. Markets trembled. Governments needed urgent support. Nathan, already positioned with advance information and prepared capital, acted swiftly. He purchased government bonds when others panicked, quietly, steadily. Over time, their value rose, and the Rothschild house secured not just profit, but influence. But it wasn't only about gain. The Rothschilds lent to rebuild roads, ports, institutions. They understood that finance, like war, shaped nations, but that finance, unlike war, could do so peacefully. Their actions during wartime were never loud. There were no banners or parades, just ledgers, letters, and silent resolve. The success of the Rothschilds during the Napoleonic Wars was not the result of a single bold move. It was the result of many quiet ones. While others reacted, they prepared. While others waited for news, they already knew. Their couriers, their correspondence, their careful coordination, these gave them an edge no army could match. But their most powerful tool was trust. Governments turned to them not just for loans, but for stability. Ministers knew that a Rothschild agreement came without noise. Transactions were handled quietly, interest rates set reasonably, repayments structured with care. There were no surprises, and in uncertain times, that reliability became more valuable than gold. Nathan Rothschild, in particular, became known for his calm under pressure. He rarely raised his voice. He never rushed. In crowded exchanges and candlelit meetings, he was methodical. His focus was not on speculation, but on structure. He believed that capital should move with purpose, not emotion. Back in Frankfurt, Amschel maintained the family's central records. Every bond, every loan, every correspondence was copied and filed. Nothing was left to chance. This central archive gave the family a shared memory, data from which they could learn, correct, and plan. The war years taught them that information was as valuable as coin. Their strategy was not to pick sides, but to preserve systems. They did not involve themselves in political ambition. They financed logistics, not conquest. While some criticized this neutrality, It protected the family from retribution and positioned them as partners in reconstruction once the fighting ended. And when peace finally returned, the Rothschilds were ready. They helped finance the Congress of Vienna, where Europe's post-war order was shaped. Their role was not dramatic, but essential. They ensured funds flowed, that agreements held, and that fragile economies could begin again. In silence, they had helped preserve the foundation of Europe. The wars had proven something lasting, that in times of chaos, calm finance was not just helpful, it was vital. In the early 19th century, long before telegrams or telephones, information moved by hand. It traveled in sealed envelopes, carried on horseback, and passed from station to station. For most, this meant delays, uncertainty, and risk. But for the Rothschilds, it became a competitive advantage. They built one of the most effective private communication systems in Europe, quiet, reliable, and faster than governments. Their couriers wore no uniforms. They were not soldiers or diplomats. Often, they looked like ordinary travelers. But they carried more than letters. They carried strategy, updates on currency shifts, notes on government decisions, insights into crops, conflicts, and contracts. The Rothschilds knew that information, when delivered before others had it, could change the outcome of a negotiation, a loan, or an entire market. Each brother maintained his own courier routes. In London, Nathan arranged riders to the Channel. In Paris, James coordinated with trusted messengers heading toward Vienna or Naples. Along the way, inns served as quiet relay points. Messages were copied by hand, forwarded through hidden channels, and tracked by the family's own records. But speed alone wasn't enough. Secrecy was equally important. Letters were written in code, sometimes in numbers, sometimes in altered spelling. Only family members and their closest clerks knew how to read them. Even if a message were lost or intercepted, it would mean little to outsiders. And when absolutely necessary, messages were delivered face to face, carried in memory rather than ink. This discretion extended to every part of their business. Clients trusted the Rothschilds not just with money, but with sensitive knowledge, state negotiations, debt conditions, internal budgets. The brothers never spoke of their clients in public. They did not boast. They did not publish balance sheets. Their power came not from being known, but from being reliable. Each office mirrored this philosophy. Clean, quiet workspaces, couriers arriving and departing without announcement, letters sorted by date and origin, logged by hand, nothing rushed, everything accounted for. In a world where wars could begin from rumor, the Rothschilds moved through silence. To outsiders, the Rothschilds appeared mysterious. They spoke rarely in public. Their names were absent from the gossip of salons and newspapers. Even among other bankers, they were known less for what they said than for what they quietly accomplished. But within the family, communication never stopped. Each morning, ledgers were opened and letters read aloud to trusted clerks. Each evening, summaries were written and packed for the next courier run. Decisions were recorded, not only what had been done, but why. This habit created a rhythm, a living archive of financial behavior that guided future actions. The family also developed private signals, short phrases, coded symbols, and markings in the margins of correspondence. These were not meant to hide scandal, but to move faster. A mark might signal urgency. A phrase might indicate an expected delay. Over time, These shorthand signals allowed the brothers to make decisions across borders without delay or confusion. One example stood out. In 1815, after the Battle of Waterloo, Nathan Rothschild received early confirmation of Napoleon's defeat before the news had reached London. Through his couriers, he acted swiftly, adjusting bond positions and stabilizing his holdings before others could react. It was not deception, nor speculation. It was preparation. The result was a strong financial position and further proof that speed and silence could shape outcomes. Yet the Rothschilds never flaunted these successes. They remained cautious, almost invisible. When they advised governments, it was done behind closed doors. When they supported infrastructure or trade, they did so without placing their names on plaques. They believed that trust lasted longer when it was not advertised. Even their buildings reflected this philosophy. In London, Paris, Vienna, and beyond, their offices were dignified but modest. Inside, there were no grand lobbies or fountains, just desks, books, and the hum of thoughtful work. Their couriers continued to ride. Their letters continued to flow. And as the century progressed, the Rothschilds remained what they had always been: present, prepared, and precise. Through secrecy and signals, they stayed ahead. Through silence, they stayed in control. By the mid-19th century, the Rothschilds had become more than bankers. They had become stewards of stability. Their influence extended beyond ledgers and letters into landscapes and architecture. But as always, it happened quietly. Across Europe, the family began acquiring land, not for display, but for preservation. Vineyards in France, estates in Austria, gardens in England. These were not acts of luxury, but of continuity. The Rothschilds understood that land held more than value, it held memory. And it could serve as a place of restoration in a world that often moved too quickly. In England, Nathan's descendants purchased rural estates in the countryside. Wide fields, quiet ponds, long tree-lined paths. These places became sanctuaries, not only for the family, but for the rhythm of their work. Important conversations were held during slow walks. Decisions were made by the warmth of firelight. Finance, for the Rothschilds, had never been separate from life. It was woven into it, calmly and completely. In France, James Rothschild developed his estate with care. He funded railways, supported artists, and maintained an open correspondence with thinkers and statesmen. His gardens were designed not to impress, but to inspire. Visitors spoke of their tranquility, their sense of order, just like the letters that still moved daily from city to city. Estates also became places of learning, libraries grew, children were taught languages, history, and finance from an early age. The Rothschilds saw education as another kind of wealth, one that could not be lost to markets or war. They raised generations not only to preserve what had been built, but to understand why it mattered. Their influence remained subtle. They did not seek titles. They did not command armies. Yet through their decisions, entire economies were supported. A bond issued here, a railway financed there, a hospital funded quietly. These were not headlines, but they shaped lives. Their homes were not courts, but many courts came to them, and not because of power, but because of trust. The Rothschild estates were not just private retreats. They became quiet symbols of a different kind of influence, one built not on command, but on consistency. Ministers, scientists, musicians, and diplomats all found their way to Rothschild homes. Some came for counsel, others for support. Most came because they knew what the family represented: discretion, clarity, and care. Over time, the family's support extended beyond finance. They funded universities, museums, botanical research, and medical institutions, often anonymously. They believed that wealth, if used thoughtfully, could strengthen what was already good in society, not to replace it, but to protect it. Their gardens preserved endangered species. Their libraries preserved thought. In Austria, Salomon Rothschild's presence was felt through infrastructure. He financed roads and railways that connected cities and supported trade. These projects did not carry his name, but they carried his standards. Delays were unacceptable. Waste was avoided. Progress was tracked carefully. Back in Frankfurt, Amschel maintained the quiet center. Though his life remained within the city's original borders, his role grew in importance. He became the keeper of family memory. Letters, ledgers, agreements, all passed through his hands or those he trained. As the elder brother, he carried not just knowledge, but tone. He set the pace, reminding the family that quiet excellence mattered more than ambition. Even the way the Rothschilds traveled reflected their values. No large entourages, no dramatic arrivals, a simple carriage, a discreet guest house, a letter of thanks. The consistency of their actions built a reputation that no title could rival. Their estates were homes, but also signals, to the world and to themselves. That calm could hold power. That structure could guide success. That money, when managed with care, could do more than accumulate. It could preserve, support, and prepare. As the 19th century advanced, the Rothschilds stood at the intersection of history and habit, not because they claimed it, but because they lived it, quietly, fully, and with lasting care. No fortune lasts by chance, and no legacy endures without caution. By the late 19th century, the Rothschild name was woven into the quiet fabric of European finance. But the world was changing. New banks emerged. Political tensions grew. Empires began to wobble under the weight of nationalism and industry. Railways expanded. Telegraphs connected continents. And yet, with all this motion, the Rothschilds continued as they always had, patiently. Their greatest tool in uncertain times was not capital. It was restraint. When markets surged, the family moved slowly. When others rushed to speculate, they stepped back. The Rothschild approach to crisis was deliberate. Assess, wait, act with care. They understood that fear could be contagious, and that calm was its cure. This was not always easy. In Paris, James Rothschild's descendants faced the turbulence of the Franco-Prussian War. In Vienna, currency fluctuations tested long-held agreements. In London, competitors adopted louder methods: advertising, mergers, public offerings. But the Rothschilds remained steady. They issued fewer loans, but made fewer errors. They trusted the strength of structure. Their internal rules reflected this. No single branch made unilateral decisions. Before any large commitment, letters were exchanged between cities. Risks were discussed. Alternatives weighed. Sometimes this meant missing opportunities, but it also meant avoiding disasters. The family also took care to remain modest in public life. While others embraced celebrity, the Rothschilds declined titles unless required by protocol. They lived well, but quietly. Their estates remained open to guests, but not to journalists. Their ledgers remained detailed, but never displayed. Even their investment choices showed caution. Rather than chase industries they didn't fully understand, they supported the familiar: infrastructure, transport, land, and long-standing bonds. Their aim was not rapid growth, but continuity. They also preserved liquidity. In a crisis, they could respond, not with desperation, but with readiness. When others sold in panic, the Rothschilds held still or offered quiet support. This approach earned them something even more valuable than profit: resilience. Resilience, the Rothschilds believed, was not about avoiding hardship. It was about preparing for it quietly, before others saw it coming. They practiced a kind of financial patience that few could match. When rumors swept through markets, they reviewed facts. When assets lost value, they looked for fundamentals. And when public confidence faltered, they lent discreetly, often acting as invisible stabilizers within the economy. One reason they could do this was their internal communication. Each branch remained in touch, not only through business updates, but through reflections. If one brother noticed a shift in public sentiment, the others took note. If one city faced new regulations, adjustments followed elsewhere. Like a well-tuned clock, the family kept time across distance and language. They also understood the emotional side of finance. Panic, like celebration, could cloud judgment. So they created routines to stay grounded, regular reviews, clear writing, mutual accountability. Their ledgers didn't just track numbers, they tracked patterns of behavior. In Frankfurt, even as their prominence waned compared to larger public banks, the Rothschilds maintained a quiet center. Amschel's successors preserved archives, cross-referenced deals, and trained the next generation. They believed that memory was a form of protection. The world around them modernized. Trains became faster, telegraphs turned days into minutes, new financial houses rose, promising speed, innovation, and bold returns. But the Rothschilds did not compete in noise. They competed in continuity. Their clients noticed. During downturns, governments and institutions returned to the family not for novelty, but for security. When markets were calm, others offered better rates. But when markets trembled, it was the Rothschilds' caution that mattered most. And through all this, their tone remained the same. No urgent declarations, no loud reassurances, just clear records, thoughtful replies, and decisions made without haste. In an age racing forward, the Rothschilds walked deliberately, and by doing so, they remained standing when others did not. As the 19th century drew to a close, the Rothschild name was known in every major capital. Yet the men who carried it remained largely unknown to the public. Their legacy was visible in bridges, railways, and treaties, but not in statues or speeches. That was by design. Discretion had always been central to the Rothschild philosophy. Meyer Amschel Rothschild, the founder, had taught his sons to value silence over attention. Wealth, he believed, should not draw the eye. It should serve a purpose, and then step aside. His descendants followed this principle with quiet discipline. Their public appearances were rare, their portraits few. When titles were offered, baron, count, nobleman, they accepted only when it served diplomacy or protected family assets. But they never allowed these honors to change their tone. Their letters remained modest, their homes refined but restrained. Inside the family, legacy was measured not in grandeur, but in practice. A Rothschild child was not raised to feel important. They were raised to be useful. From an early age, they learned ledgers and correspondence. They visited offices. They listened to the quiet hum of daily work. And they were taught to earn trust, not demand it. Governance of the family bank followed the same rhythm. Decisions were made collectively. Elders guided, but never imposed. Records were kept. Disputes were resolved through letters, not argument. And above all, the goal was not expansion, but endurance. They invested in people, not just projects. Scientists, educators, builders, quiet visionaries who shared the family's belief in order and calm. Many of these contributions were anonymous. A loan that saved a school, a fund that stabilized a hospital. No public recognition, just results. Even within the family, success was not loudly rewarded. It was acknowledged privately, often with a letter, a dinner, or a quiet word of thanks. This culture of humility allowed the Rothschilds to remain united, while others fractured under ambition. As Europe faced new tensions, colonial competition, industrial unrest, shifting alliances, the Rothschilds remained steady. Their legacy was not in control, but in continuity. Continuity for the Rothschilds was never about preserving the past. It was about preserving principles. They adapted quietly as the world changed. When public banks began to dominate, they refined their niche. When markets demanded new structures, they responded with care. But their core remained unchanged. Trust built over time, discretion in action, and loyalty to a shared identity. One way they protected this identity was through structure. Each branch of the family operated semi-independently, yet remained tied by regular communication and agreed values. When disagreements arose, as they sometimes did, they were resolved through dialogue and documentation. No single brother or cousin could act in ways that risked the reputation of the whole. Their letters continued to serve not only as business tools, but as a form of legacy. Bound volumes filled with correspondence were preserved, passed down, studied. They became manuals of tone, style, and judgment. A new generation might learn how to lend not from theory, but from a letter written 50 years earlier. The Rothschilds also embraced philanthropy in their own manner, quietly, thoughtfully. They did not attach their names to every cause, but they supported those that aligned with their values: education, science, culture, and care for the vulnerable. These efforts were not performed for approval. They were expressions of continuity. They rarely made public declarations, but their actions spoke steadily. When conflict threatened to divide Europe again, the Rothschilds maintained connections across borders. Their network, once built to move money, now moved understanding. They advised from the sidelines, bridging language and loyalty, and they did this without changing who they were. No memoirs, no monuments, no attempt to shape the story in their favor. They trusted the rhythm of time, that if they acted with patience, the story would tell itself. In this quiet, enduring approach, their legacy was not a single chapter. It was the structure of the entire book. By the dawn of the 20th century, the Rothschilds had weathered revolutions, wars, financial crises, and industrial revolutions. They had supported kings, financed railways, advised governments, and quietly built bridges across political, cultural, and religious divides. Yet through it all, their name remained associated with something far simpler than power. It was associated with trust. Unlike most dynasties, the Rothschilds had not relied on inheritance alone. They had relied on habit, the daily act of writing carefully, the practice of replying on time, the discipline of verifying facts. These were small things, but over decades and then centuries, they created something rare: quiet influence. They never led nations. They didn't own armies. And yet, When decisions were made in the highest rooms of Europe, the Rothschilds were often invited, not because they demanded a seat, but because they had earned one. Their power was not in control, but in contribution. In London, Nathan's descendants continued to advise on sovereign loans and infrastructure. In Paris, James's line supported scientific research and the arts. In Vienna and Naples, the family's presence slowly faded as new institutions took shape, but their influence lingered in contracts, in records, in landscapes they had once helped shape. And in Frankfurt, where the story began, the old house in the Judengasse no longer stood, but the memory remained. The idea that from a narrow street, through patience and paper, a family could build something that endured. What made their story lasting was not their wealth. Others were wealthier, not their scope. Others grew faster. It was that the Rothschilds chose a tone and kept it. Through upheaval and uncertainty, they moved with calm, spoke with clarity, and acted with care. Their archives were never burned. Their letters were never sold. They were kept, not for pride, but for learning, so that each generation would remember, strength is not noise, it is structure, and legacy is not in what one owns, it is in how one behaves when no one is watching. The world moved on, new financial centers emerged, public banks rose to dominance, technologies transformed communication, travel, and commerce. But the lessons of the Rothschilds remained, folded quietly into the routines of those who valued steadiness over speed. In family meetings, their descendants still spoke of tone, of writing clearly, of lending carefully. The ledgers were digital now, but the principles had not changed. A deal, they believed, should still be built on understanding. A reputation, once earned, should never be spent. Occasionally, they were asked why they never published more, why they never told the full story. But their answer was always the same. The story is in the structure, in the habits passed from desk to desk, in the quiet confidence of a balanced ledger, in the soft weight of a sealed letter handed to a courier just before dawn. They knew that quiet power wasn't about hiding. It was about choosing not to perform. It was about showing up consistently, especially when others did not. And it was about being ready, not for applause, but for responsibility. What began with Mayer in the attic, with a box of antique coins and the scent of pine shavings, had become a global network, then a philosophy, and then a reminder that money is not the final measure of wealth, that trust cannot be borrowed, and that the calmest voices often say the most. The Rothschilds left few speeches, but they left letters, and those letters, across wars, borders, and generations, told the same story again and again. Be clear, be timely, be steady, and above all, do not mistake attention for influence. Real power, like a well-kept ledger, speaks for itself.